Our next speaker is Dr. Ofir Hayim. He is a postdoctoral fellow at the Mendel Scholion Research Center at the Hebrew University. Last year, we can say he was a Fulbright postdoctoral fellow at the Princeton University. Ofir's research concerns the social, intellectual, and linguistic interactions between different religious and ethnic groups in the pre-modern Iranian world. His current project is dedicated to a rich and multilingual corpus which was dubbed the Afghan Geniza. This textual corpus sheds light on voiceless groups that are virtually absent from known sources, particularly the Jewish minority, the rural population, and the urban landowners. So please, Ofir.
Okay, good morning everyone. Thank you for coming. I would like to thank also the organizers for inviting me to this conference. Well, we've discussed Central Asia, the frontier of Central Asia in the previous lecture. I would like to take you to another frontier region, this time the border of the Indian and the Muslim world, and leap in time probably to the 10th century, 4th century Hijri. My work is still in progress. Any comment, criticism is of course welcome. I uploaded the transcription and translation of the new source about which I'm talking today. And without further ado, let us begin. So, among the many treasures found in the manuscript trove known as the Afghan Geniza, a rare fragment written in Arabic stands out. This fragment provides a unique account of the political situation of the eastern frontier of the Islamic world on the eve of the establishment of the Ghaznavid state. The Afghan Geniza comprises mainly documentary materials, such as letters, legal and administrative documents, and various lists and accounts. It sheds new and fascinating light on the long history of pre-Mongol Eastern Iran, and especially on two subjects, Jewish life in Bamiyan and Ghazneh, during the first decades of the Ghaznavid states, more or less up to the arrival of the Seljuk and the Battle of Dandan Khan. And the second subject is the administrative mechanisms of the Bamiyan district during the Ghurid and Khwarezm Shahi period on the eve of the Mongol invasion. You have two main groups in the Afghan Geniza. The one is datable to the early 11th century, the other to the second half of the 12th century and the early 13th century. But nevertheless, these documents are accompanied by fragments of literary and religious works written in Arabic, New Persian, Hebrew, Aramaic, Judeo-Arabic, Judeo-Persian, you name it. While many of these fragments belong to known works written by Jewish or Muslim authors, others remain unidentified. And such is the case with the fragment discussed in my talk. It appears to be a folio from an unknown work, perhaps now lost local history of some region in present-day Afghanistan or some urban center. Like many other texts from the Afghan Geniza, its geography stretches from Bamiyan to Ghazneh. I will show you a map instantly, so you'll know exactly on which area I'm talking about. To my knowledge, this fragment has no parallels, and it provides a unique report of events taking place in this vast area. The fragment describes preparations for a battle between local Muslim rulers, some of whom may have been vassals of the Samanids, and the Lawik, the local ruler of Ghazneh in the mid-10th century. While the Lawik seems to be in Ghazneh, situated there, his rivals, these Muslim local rulers, travel from the area of Bamyan south to the battleground in the Ghazneh area. Very little is known about the history of the Ghazneh area until the second half of the 10th century. That is before the arrival of Alp Tegin, the Turkish Ghulam commander of the Samanids, and the subsequent establishment of the Ghaznavid state by Seboktegin. The name Ghazneh is not attested in historical and geographical works before the 10th century, as beautifully shown by Minoru Inaba. However, early accounts use the name Zabulistan, which appears in my title. It's a region that stretches from the Kabul Valley in the north and Zamin Dovar and Rukhaj in the south. And here you have Sistan, which was conquered in a pretty early period by the Muslim armies. And when we get to the 10th century, which Ghazneh begins to appear in geographical works and historical ones, it is stated, it is regarded to be as the main urban center of the region of Zabulistan. So today we will focus about this area here, which today is situated in central and eastern Afghanistan. The arrival of Muslim armies to Zabulistan and Kabul in the north is attested as early as the mid-7th century. The commanders of the eastern frontier region of Sistan, particularly Abdurrahman bin Samra, led raids to the north, which were intended to receive tribute from the local rulers as well as plunder. Thus, during the reign of Muawiyah, Abdurrahman managed to secure Bust, somewhere here, as on the Helmand River and extract tribute from Kabul. So Bust was the southernmost, the northernmost post of Islam for a very long period of time, for 3 centuries at least. During the Umayyad and early Abbasid period, the indigenous rulers of Zabulistan, the Rutbils, and their neighbors to the north, the Kabul Shahs from Kabul, offered harsh resistance to the Muslim armies, and therefore the advance of Islam was brought to a halt, again with Bust serving as the frontier post. A significant stage in the Islamic history of this region begin in the Safarid conquest of Ghazneh. Gardizi, a Persian chronicler from the 11th century, writes that the inner city, Sharistan of Ghazneh, was destroyed by Yaqub bin Layth. While Bayhaqi, another chronicler from the 11th century, informs us that the city was reconstructed by Yaqub's brother, Amr bin Layth. The arrival of the Safarids marked the integration of Ghazneh into the Muslim domain. And this is reflected by the inclusion of the city in geographical works from the 10th century and onward. During the 4th century, the city was probably under Samanid suzerainty. This is inferred from the anonymous treatise written in Persian in the 11th century called Tarikh al-Sistan and Ibn al-Athir's Al-Kamil fi Tarikh. According to the accounts appearing in these works, during the rebellion in Sistan, following the death of the Samanid Amir Ahmad bin Ismail in 914, the Samanid army in Bust was reinforced by troops marching from Ghazneh, marching to the south, and they were led by a certain Sa'id al-Taliqani, who probably was affiliated with the Samanids. A few decades later, there's a certain Ibrahim bin Abd al-Ghaffar, who minted coins in Ghazneh, and they're datable to the years 949, 955. This Ibrahim may have governed Ghazneh on behalf of the Samanids. The name of the Samanid Amir appears in the coins. The next figure whose name is linked to Ghazneh is, of course, Alp Tegin, which I briefly mentioned before. He was a Turkish Ghulam commander of the Samanids, He climbed up the military hierarchy and achieved great influence during the reign of the Amirs Nuh I and Abd al-Malik I, not the Abd al-Malik you have in mind, but the Samanid one. Remember, we are leaping in time. And the death of the Amir Abd al-Malik brought about a succession crisis in the Samanid realm. It ended with the dethroning of Alptegin's candidate, Nasser bin Abd al-Malik, after his one-day reign. So consequently, Alptegin found himself in a pickle, and he journeyed south to the fringes of the Samanid state and ended up in Ghazni. He conquered it from its local ruler, Delawik, in 962, 351 Hijri, and after Alptegin's death in a year later, he was succeeded by a series of Turkish ghulams, the last of whom was Seboktegin, who founded the Ghaznavid state. The event described in this fragment, therefore, are situated between Ibrahim bin Abd al-Ghaffar, which we only know from four coins, and Alptegin, who arrived in Ghazni in 351. It demonstrates the presence of different actors, some of which are non-Muslims, in a region that was not fully integrated into the world of Islam by the mid-10th century. So I will now turn to discuss the text and its historical significance. So let's start by talking a bit about what does the text say to us? What can we know from it? And again, you're welcome to have a look at the transcription and translation on the draft folder. So we hear of a certain party leaving Ghurwand, which is west to Bamyan, between Bamyan and Kabul. Then we hear of a certain Mansur arriving in Bamyan. Then we hear of a Mansur conferring much honor. I will elaborate on it very soon, on some unidentified figure. Again, this is very laconic text. It's only one folio of an entire work, so the context is missing. After this scene where he confers much honor, he begins to mobilize men for a military campaign, and he seeks the help of a certain Ahmad bin Muhammad, the Tamran Farandeh, or Tamran Faranda in Arabic accent. Mansur and Ahmad meet at the territory of the Khalaj Turks in the year 47. I will shortly discuss this. Ahmad bin Muhammad promises to fight against Ali bin Muhammad Lawik, the ruler of Ghazni. Then comes a very obscure passage. Again, the author refers here to events which the readers know, probably from previous parts of the work. Then the last passage contains the following. Ali bin Muhammad Lawik and his ally, the son of Shah Bahim, prepare for battle. Ali seeks aid from a certain Al-Muwafaq bin Asad, but Al-Muwafaq bin Asad is recruited to the other side of Mansur and Ahmad bin Muhammad. This is, in a nutshell, what we have in the text. So let me just here discuss the date, the people, some of the people who appear in this text, and some of the toponyms. And I will try to contextualize it and convince you that it was a combat between the local rulers of Ghazni and the area of Kabul and a coalition of local Muslim rulers in the mid-10th century. I hope I'm not imagining it. So, let's start here. The date. We have said we have the year 47. The text concerns a battle taking place around the only date that we have in the fragment, the 8th of Jumada al-Ula, year 47. Now I interpret the year 47 as 347, that is 958, 959. This interpretation is based on the occurrence of some of the titles and the names in the text, which I will discuss. If this assumption is correct, then we are talking about the days of the Samanid Amir, the aforementioned Samanid Amir, Abd al-Malik. and his appointed governor of Khorasan, Abu al-Hasan Muhammad bin Ibrahim al-Simjuri, a known family of Turkish ulams under the Samanids. So, we have two rival factions mentioned in the text. On the one hand, we have the local Muslim rulers, and on the other, we have a coalition of, or a group of, or two local rulers from the area of Ghazni and Kabul and further east. Okay. Now, these local rulers were probably vassals of the Samanids, and perhaps they were acting on behalf of their overlords, sitting up north in Bukhara and Samarkand. So let's start with this faction. They're the good guys. So the first faction, we have Mansur. It is led by a certain Mansur, who is first mentioned in the beginning of the text, line 2, right? He is known, فَأَقَامَ Mansur بِالْبَامِيَانِ. So he stayed in Bamyan for nearly 20 days. And he appears to be a prominent figure in the region whose high position is inferred from his treatment of his allies. What do I mean? At the beginning of the text, the author describes how Mansur confers much honor on a certain figure, again, an unidentified one. He bestows on him a robe of honor. He gives him many gifts, according to the text, horses to him, to his men, and he accommodated them in the new palace in a place called Al-Maidan. Now, Al-Maidan could be a place between Kabul and Bamyan, present-day Maidan Shahr. So it means that they were on the area of Bamyan, and on his way, I don't know if this unidentified figure was part of the coalition or not. Again, the previous parts are missing. But he seems to be connected with Mansur. So again, the main point here is that Mansur was a prominent figure in the area. Now, Mansur's interaction with his ally, Ahmad bin Muhammad, also reveals his high standing. When Ahmad bin Muhammad promises to defeat Mansur's rival, Delawik, he states that Delawik withheld the payment of the land tax, of the Kharaj, from Mansur. Again, and we can debate later, whoever wishes to debate about it, about this word, whether it's in or is, because this could be a zal also in this text, based on its paleography. And Ahmad bin Muhammad adds that he will fight against Delawik until the latter pronounces Mansur's name on the pulpit. حتى يقيم له الدعوة على المنبر. Two known, the fact that Delawik was expected to pay taxes to Mansur and that he should pronounce the letter's name on the pulpit demonstrates, in my opinion, Mansur's role as a Muslim sovereign in the region. Two known individuals named Mansur were part of the Samanid elite during the mid-10th century. We have Abu Salih Mansur I bin Nuh, the brother of the presiding Amir, Abdul Malik. He was the Samanid Amir from 961 to 976, from 350 to 365. If this identification is correct, Mansur may have battled the local dynasties in this frontier region on behalf of his brother, the Samanid Amir Abdul Malik, in 347. The second individual in that time, called Mansur, was Abu Nasr Mansur bin Bayqara, again, a military commander of Turkic origin of the Samanids. And he was mentioned in several historical sources. For example, in the Nizam al-Mulk, Siyasat Nameh, this Mansur bin Bayqara is described as the Hajib Bozorg, the great Hajib, right, of Mansur I. But, in my opinion, given that Mansur's name should be pronounced on the minbar, suggests that he was more than a member of the Samanid family or a high-ranking commander. He should be seen perhaps as a ruler, a local one, in the region of central and eastern Afghanistan. Based on the fragment discussed here, it may be suggested that Mansur was the ruler of Bamyan. Just a conjecture. His connection to this urban center is apparent in the text. We've seen that he stayed in Bamyan for nearly 20 days, and later on he was joined by the people of Bamyan in the Sawad of Ghazneh, in an unidentified place called Khaqab. So we have this strong connection to Bamyan, in my opinion. Now, this gets more and more conjectural. In Istakhri's Kitab al-Masalik wal-Mamalik, that was composed towards the end of the first half of the 10th century, we find an interesting account regarding Bamyan. It was the chief town of a vast province, Amal, which included the towns of Bashghurfand, which should be understood as Faj Ghurwand, the pass of Ghurwand. It's a place not far from Bamyan, to the east of Bamyan, Sakawand, Kabul, Lajra, whatever that means, Parvan, and Ghazneh. So we will instantly see these places on the map. And if accepted, this report might reflect the political importance of Bamyan during the mid-10th century, suggesting that the power of its local ruler extended as far as Kabul and Ghazneh, or at least theoretically. In this context, the act of granting Sakawand near Ghazneh to al-Muwafaq bin Asad by Ahmad bin Muhammad may be interpreted as how Mansur perceived his authority over a vast region that extends to the east and south as described by al-Istakhri. Now a reservation here should be mentioned. The question that rises is, can we translate this report of in al-Istakhri into political reality? That's a big question, and I'm still pondering about it. Does it have any political significance, the fact that the Amal of Bamyan has these towns? What does it exactly mean? Perhaps this fragment could shed more historical context on this report. Now, as for the name for the Ism Mansur, we said that, let's say, if this is the ruler of Bamyan and he's called Mansur, we should also talk about his name. Okay, in the 10th century, it is quite reasonable to assume that the ruler of Bamyan, okay, who is titled the Shir or Sher, was Muslim. The Kitab al-Buldan by Yaqubi provides us a report, the earliest report actually of the Islamization of the Shir of Bamyan. And this occurred in the time of the Abbasid Caliph al-Mansur. We'll not go into the details, but later on, let's say that we see that there are several shirs of Bamyan who were already Muslim and were also who held positions in the Abbasid court and were appointed by the Abbasids to rule in their name in various regions. And a nice report is given in Al-Tabari's, where the Shah Bamyan, probably called Al-Harthama, was appointed governor of Yemen in 229. Though the ruling dynasty or dynasties converted to Islam in the early Abbasid period, the Shers of Bamyan converted to Abbasid period, converted in the Abbasid period, it seems that other sections of the Bamyan Valley were not Muslim. With the rise of the local Iranian dynasties, Bamyan was conquered by the Saffarids. And the founder of the Safarid dynasty, Yaqub bin Layth, led an expedition to this area around 256, 870. During this campaign, he destroyed a Buddhist temple and sent the idols to Baghdad. As for the Samanid period, Bamyan may have become part of the Samanid realm around the beginning of the 10th century. And this is This occurred as consequence of Ismail, the Samanid Amir, Ismail's victory over Amr bin Layth. Now, we have a hoard found in Hungary, where we have a dirham coin in the name of the Samanid Amir, Nasser I, from Bamiyan. So we can say we had very, very little evidence regarding this area and this time, but still we have one coin showing that probably they were vessels, the Shirs of Bamiyan were vessels of the Samanid during that time. But as Inaba said, due to lack of further evidence, the nature of the relationship between the local rulers of Bamiyan and the Samanids remains unclear. As pointed out by Inaba, it is assumable that there was no serious confrontation between the two polities. At any rate, the local rulers of Bamiyan still held the title Shir up to the mid-10th century, as Alptegin fought with the local Shir during his march to Ghazne. Given the long history of the Shirs of Bamiyan with their Muslim overlords, that is the early Abbasids and later on the early Samanids, and in light of the report by Al-Istakhri concerning the centrality of Bamiyan in a large province, Amal, extending as far as Kabul and Ghazne, we might suggest that the ruler of Bamiyan, that is Mansur, was capable of organizing and leading a military expedition against the Lawik and the Hindu Shah. Now let's go back to the map. I just want to illustrate the areas mentioned in Al-Istakhri. So if we have, this is Bamiyan, so Ghurwand is found here, Parvan is here, Kabul is here, Ghazne is here, Lajra mentioned in this is probably somewhere here. So you see that the Amal of Bamiyan consists of many urban centers, important ones. Okay. This said Mansur, whom I talked about quite a lot, is aided by a group of local rulers. The first of whom being Ahmad bin Muhammad. He is titled Tamran Faranda. The anonymous author of Hudud al-Alam, a Persian geography composed in the late 10th century, states that it is the title held by the ruler of Tamran, a mountainous district near Ribate Karwan. In fact, the Hudud al-Alam is the only other work mentioning this title, Tamran Faranda, thus suggesting that the text discussed here refers to events occurring in the 10th century. Was he under the political influence of Bamiyan? His cooperation with Mansur against the Lawik of Ghazne could raise this question. We know that later on he was a vassal of the rulers of another region called Guzgan. During the late 10th century, he was the ruler of he was a vassal of the Farirunids, who were in their turn vassals of the Samanids. So they were part of a, let's say, a multi-layered political structure. It's an interesting question to see what was his status. Furthermore, Ahmad bin Muhammad is also titled Mawla Amir al-Mu'minin in the text. It may exhibit some personal connection to the Abbasid Caliph, maybe not, maybe he took the title to himself. That's an interesting question in itself. But interestingly, and this is what I would like to show you, and this is not the only local ruler to hold this title in this region around that time. A Samanid false minted in Parwan, again, more or less between Bamiyan and Kabul, demonstrate the same practice. We have a coin minted by the Amir Nasser bin Ahmad bin Yusuf, not Nasser bin Ahmad the Samanid Amir. He was already dead by that time. He was probably the local ruler of Parvan and a vassal of the Samanid Amir Mansur bin Nuh. So again, we see that we have these small rulers of small principalities in the area of Bamiyan were titled Mawla Amir and Mu'minin. That's an interesting phenomenon. Okay, so this is the second ally. So we have Bamiyan. The imagined community in my head sees the following. We have Bamyan with Mansur, we have Tamran, area not far from Mansur, where Ahmad bin Muhammad rules, and they both go on a battle against the ruler of Ghazni. Now, Ahmad bin Muhammad assures Mansur to assist him against the Lawik. We've seen that. Furthermore, he seems to mobilize local lords in the war effort against the Lawik. He sends his Hajib to a certain Al-Muwafaq bin Asad. The former encourages the latter to join Mansur's faction. The Hajib brings Al-Muwafaq together with another ruler in the region, the Sahib of Bazghund, probably near Ghazni. In addition, Al-Muwafaq is granted the citadel of Sakawand, another site near Ghazni. We'll see a map, don't worry, on the condition that he conquers its citadel. In exchange, Al-Muwafaq provides them with troops and 2 elephants. Now, another conjecture. Al-Muwafaq bin Asad may be related to the Shars. Notice the similarity to the Shir of Bamyan, the local dynasty of Gharchistan, yet another region in the line that is formed by Bamyan and Tamran. And it's a territory east of Herat, and we will see it on the map soon. According to Utbi's Tarikh al-Yamini, a chronicle composed in the early Ghaznavid period, there was the Shah during the time of Sebuktegin and Mahmud. The Shah was Abu Nasr Muhammad bin Asad, and his son was Muhammad. So, and furthermore, in Ahsan al-Takasim, al-Muqaddasi relates that the Shah's seat of power was in a place called Abshin or Bashin, and it has a nice Friday mosque and some ribatat. And in one of the manuscripts of this work, we have the following addition, that these places were built by Al-Faqih, Al-Fadil, Abu Nasr Muhammad bin Asad, the Shah. So we have this historical figure appearing in 2 places, and he may be related to Al-Muwafaq bin Asad. I mean, they could have been brothers, and since Abu Nasr Muhammad was the ruling Shah from at least the 380s or 990s, Al-Muwafaq bin Asad could have been his predecessor. We're talking about 347, a few decades before that. Again, a reservation. At the same time, it should be taken into account that Al-Muwafaq bin Asad was promised Sakawand, which is pretty far from Gharchistan. We'll see it on the map. And that he supplied Mansur's faction with 2 elephants. And this suggests that he was not based in Gharchistan, but further east on the Indian frontier, in my opinion. But I had to show this because we have nothing else. So the same patronym does not necessarily indicate any type of kinship. Of course, we have to be careful. This is just a suggestion. So the plot thickens. We have Bamyan, we have Tamran, and we have Gharchistan here. Again, Sakawand is here, pretty far. This is the Indian frontier, okay? So, okay. Probably not, but maybe yes. Moving on to the bad guys, the second faction. The ruler of Ghazni, who is called here Ali bin Muhammad Lawik. The second faction is led by this individual who belonged to the line of the Lawiks. The Lawiks were the local dynasty of Ghazni, whose members are mentioned in 3 sources with regard to events taking place in the 10th century. All these sources are Persian. We have Siyasat Name by Nizam al-Mulk, Tabaqat al-Nasiri by Juzjani, and Shaban Karawi's Majma al-Ansab fil Tawarikh. All 3 authors mention the Lawik in relation to Alptegin's arrival in Ghazni in 351 or 962, and the latter's victory of over the former. Some manuscript of Juzjani, the opponent of some manuscript of Juzjani attach the kunya Abu Bakr to the Lawik. Later on, the Lawik also appears as the opponent of Alptegin's successors, his son Ishaq and other Turkish rulams first and foremost Boritagin, and of course Seboktegin, the founder of the Ghaznavid state. So we have Abu Bakr Lawik in the beginning. When Abtegin arrives later on, we have Abu Ali Lawik. All these names are provided in Juzjani's Tabaqat Nasiri. In other sources, we do not have any names attached to the Lawik. Yes. Okay. So was the Lawik Muslim? This is a question that is asked by several scholars who do not know this fragment. This is a new one. So we have these Lawiks with kunyas, right? Abu Bakr, Abu Lawik. But on the other hand, one source tells us that that the Lawik was an idolater. So, but I think this name clearly showed that he was at least nominally Muslim. Doesn't mean anything else. And clearly this was a turbulent time for the people of Ghazne, in which two groups battled over the city. After Abtegin arrives in Ghazne, it's not the end of the chapter. You see Ghazne being conquered by the Lawik again several times, and the Turkish Ghulams drive them out. They go back, they come back with the help of the Hindu Shahs. And this may reflect what occurred there in past decades, that is, in our fragment and perhaps earlier on. Now, Ali bin Muhammad, sorry about that, Ali bin Muhammad Lawik is assisted by the son of Shah Bahim. Who is Shah Bahim? The latter, Shah Bahim, is probably a member of the Hindu Shahi dynasty, and particularly the Hindu Shahi ruler Bhimadeva, who ruled from 921 to 960. He is mentioned in Al-Biruni's encyclopedic work on the culture and history of India, Tahqiq Ma lil Hind, and that the Hindu Shahi kingdom was not part of the Islamic domain is verified in the text. We don't need the text to know that, but still. The Hindu Shah's son, right, headed the Lawik's men, who are described as uluj, as unbelievers. So we've discussed some of the figures appearing in this text and their possible identification. Now let's turn to the battleground itself. We don't have the battle scene in our fragment. We don't have its aftermath. But since the battleground, since we have many toponyms around the area of Ghazne, we can assume that the battle took place in the area of Ghazne. This assumption is based, of course, as I said, on several toponyms that are mentioned in the text. And let's focus on two of them. You don't see it quite well on the map, but we'll try again. So this is Ghazne. This is a Soviet map, which is very helpful if you study the geography and history of medieval Afghanistan. Let's focus on the first place, Ishniz, which appears in the text twice. Ishniz should be identified with present-day Shiniz, or Shniz. It is a river that rises north of Ghazne. Ali bin Muhammad Lawik marched to this place, probably from Ghazne, and this should be also the place where Al-Muwafaq bin Asad joined Ahmad bin Muhammad with his troops and 2 elephants. And significantly, not far from Ghazne, not far from Ishniz, lies Charkh in the Logar Valley, which was the place where Seboktegin defeated the Hindu Shahs and the Lawiks later on. So this was probably a preferred battleground for in that time. And the other place I would like to talk to you about, which I already mentioned, is Sakawan, which appears in Ali Stakhri's report. This is a place in the Logar Valley. This is the Logar Valley. And it's situated on the route between Ghazne and Kabul up north. Medieval sources describe this place as a pilgrimage site for Hindus. And indeed, archaeological surveys that were taking place in the 20th century confirmed that. We have the remains of a Hindu Shahi temple together with mud brick structures from the Islamic period. And this seems to be in line with the fragment. According to the author, the citadel of Sakawand was promised to al-Muwafaq bin Asad, Mansur's ally, and the condition that he conquers the citadel. So Sakawand was probably ruled by the Hindu Shah Alawite coalition. So, although it is impossible to equate all the proper names mentioned in the fragment with actual historical characters or pinpoint the toponyms on the map, I suggest the following scenario. So, the fragment concerns a military expedition comprising a few vessels of the Samanid, notably Mansur, the Sher of Bamyan, Ahmad bin Muhammad, the Tamran Farandeh, and perhaps also the ruler of Gharchistan, al-Muwafaq bin Asad. The coalition traveled south to wage war against Ali bin Muhammad Lawik, the ruler of Ghazni, and the Hindu Shah, who refused to acknowledge Samanid suzerainty in Sabulistan and Kabul. Although the battle scene and its aftermath remain unknown, we may surmise that the two rival parties met near Ghazni, probably in Ishniz, up here. So to conclude, during the pre-Ghaznavid period, namely up to the mid-10th century, different Muslim and non-Muslim regional forces vied for control over the area which makes up present-day eastern Afghanistan, particularly Ghazni and Kabul. By that time, however, the surrounding regions, Bamyan in the west, and Sistan, Zamindovar, and Rukhaj down here, had already become part of the Muslim domain. The discussed fragment offers a glimpse of the political realities on the eastern fringes of the Islamic world on the eve of the establishment of the Ghaznavid state, where we have local Jāhiliyya from Islam. The coalition of local Muslim lords waging war against the unruly Lawiks and the Hindu Shahis was probably yet another link, probably one of the last, in a long history of clashes between Muslim and non-Muslim actors in the Ghazni area. The line formed by Gharchistan, Tamran, Bamyan, probably Parwan here too, served as the frontier that was constantly pushed south and east with the purpose of expanding Islamic rules into territory that has yet to accept Islam on the one hand, and the suzerainty of the Samanids on the other hand. This continuous situation was eventually brought to an end a few years later, in 351, 962, with the arrival of Alptegin in Ghazni, and the expansion of the early Ghaznavid rulers who managed to drive out both the Lawiks and the Hindu Shahs. So this was an attempt also, hope not too pretentious, but to have another look at the Samanid period and of the Samanids, from the focus on Central Asia and the steppe to its frontier with the Indian world. And thank you.
If I may combine, say, خيلي ممنونة ألف عافية ويشار كوخ. Following your Guinea's multi-language, let's say. But just during your talk, I was like, I remembered one piece by Renata Hollod. She, it's another period, but the method is, she dealt with a dish full of, there's a battle scene between two groups, and there are some inscriptions, and there is a mention of date, place, and it's supposedly, it's far from here, it's more Azerbaijan, a bit later, Khalkhal, but it's, she's dealing with different groups, and it's interesting. Fortunately for us, art historians, at least there is, you can see people. Here we just hear about their names. So thank you.
Thank you. I will look into that.
Please, questions, Michael.
Ofir, thank you very much. This is really a fascinating text, which throws light on this almost unknown period. I just first wanted to comment on this state of political fragmentation, which we see reflected in this document, which is certainly a direct continuation from the previous period, from the pre-Islamic period. Although all these people, or most of them, appear to be Muslim, but they are still local lords, and we see this political fragmentation, which is absolutely natural for Afghanistan until the present day. So, despite what we perceive as the first conquest during the Safarid period, we still see this fragmentation, which is eliminated only during the Ghaznavids.
Yes.
And what I wanted to ask is that, you are working on all documents from this Afghan Geniza. Some of them are dated also to this period, and if you combine the material from it with the Bactrian archive from Rob, can you give us some general insight what can be learned from these documents about this process of Islamization of the region?
Okay, thank you. Great question. Okay, we have the Bactrian documents that arrived more or less in the time that the Afghan Geniza arrived to the antiquities market. And we have also documents in Arabic from the early Abbasid period. And there is some overlap between the Bactrian documents and the Arabic documents. Some of them belong to the same family archive. From a place called Rob, as you've mentioned, it's a bit north to Bamiyan. And in my opinion, what we can learn from the Islamization process there, that it's more of a political conclusion that the early Abbasid were not very interested in that region by that time. They were interested in the tribute that they get. They managed, most of the Arabic documents are tax receipts. Later on, we see a few legal documents too. But you see that the local population still belonged to the Bactrian culture, religiously, linguistically, socially. They managed their own affairs. They had this autonomy, and the Abbasids just sent their representative there to collect the taxes. So by that time, let's say the Islam, most of the population was not Muslim, in my opinion. But we're dealing here with a different period, which is the 10th century. We're talking about 200 years later, from the Bactrian documents and the Arabic ones. And by that time, this frontier line, in my opinion, is already more or less, it's not only the rulers were Muslim, but also a significant part of the population, probably. This is what enabled the Ghaznavids perhaps easier control of this region. That what facilitated the control there. And dealing with other parts of this huge corpus that arrived from Afghanistan, not only the Afghan Geniza again, but Bactrian documents and so on. So we have, for example, the archive of the Jewish family from the 11th century that I'm currently working on. And one of the toponyms mentioned in this fragment, we can only find in the archival family, probably a small valley in the Bamiyan area called Wanshan. So we have it here in the account book of the Jewish landowner that I'm currently studying his archive. We have it again in a legal document in Arabic where he purchases land in the valley of Wanshan. Valley in the Bamiyan area. So you can see how important it is to combine all the different parts of this dossier, right? And extract as much as we can about Muslim history, Jewish history, cultural history, whatnot.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. Do any of these sources, not necessarily this document, but any of your sources on the region refer to the Buddha statue that was destroyed by the Taliban? I noticed you had a slide of that site, which
yes. Yes.
Thanks.
I wish. No, the sources here, no, but the geographical works do mention them. They have the big statue and the small statue, but the sources that arrived, this huge dossier that arrived from Afghanistan, I haven't seen any mention of these statues.
Okay, two questions. Terms in the documents, one in the recto, one in the verso, both in line 17. It's written there minbar, or it can be read in a different way.
Oh, I know what you. Yeah, I know what you're asking. I'll find it. Going back. So let's find this in a second. Here.
Yeah.
So yes, this. So Ra has a diacritical dot always in this manuscript. So he indicates Ra with a lower dot, Za with an upper dot. So that's constant.
That's
Yes,
written.
that's
Okay. And on the other side, which I found very interesting, it's talking about the ikta, right?
Yes.
To be given if he conquers.
Yes.
Well, it's very interesting because it helps us also with development of the system of ikta. So, do we know more documentations talking about how this worked?
Yeah, no. I mean, okay, after the Seljuks arrived, of course, ikta gets...
yeah, but this is...
yes, much...
This is so interesting.
Several decades later.
It's an early landmark for this term.
Yes, so it might mean the same thing in the sense that he was, given the permission to collect taxes in that place, which I find more convincing if I place him in Gharchistan, perhaps. But again, I'm still thinking about this because, yeah, it's quite early.
Yes. Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah.
So, if I understand well, most of these rulers were of dynasties of non-Islamic origin.
If I identify them correctly, yes.
And then the whole conflict seems to be an ad hoc, to me at least, as you an ad hoc local alliance against another ad hoc local alliance, that a proper jihad of joint Muslim forces against non-Muslims, and it's also strengthened by I think there is a bit which when the bad guys they also court some of the other party to join them, but eventually he joins the good guys. So
yes.
So it's not that who would be fixed, and the whole thing doesn't seem to have a heavy religious motivation.
Yes. So thank you. You're right. It's more complicated than that. It's not us against them, us Muslim against non-Muslims. Ali bin Muhammad Lawik is nominally Muslim, at least nominally. And but in another source we have an interesting account about him, saying that he has kinship ties or marriage ties to the Hindu Shahs. So it's, yes, you're right. It's not exactly as we think of it as a proper, let's say, jihad, okay, where there's only Muslims and they're fighting against the heretics or infidels. But I think that we should give it some religious hue or color, because we're talking about the Samanids, all right? And in their opinion, maybe one of the local rulers, I don't know, they were not Muslim enough. They should accept, if they accept our suzerainty of the Samanids, then they are proper Muslim. If not, then they're not. So I tend to see it that way.
In the first part of your lecture, you mentioned Jaysh ul-Fana, as the army of destruction. But most probably it is the fana is not the destruction of the enemy,
Yes.
but the willingness to fight until death and be annihilated in this war. Most probably, I know it from other contexts.
Yes, this is the translation given by Bosworth, who I just followed him. But exactly, the army was, yes, you're right.
I have another question talking about that. I don't know the archaeology of this region. Do we know about the ribatat of this area?
We have many places starting with the now Ribati Karwan, and
perhaps it was transformed later on to a Rodin.
Yes.
But
So
originally could have been
Yes.
a ribat.
yes, that's what one of the only people dealing with the geography of medieval Afghanistan sits in Kyoto, Minoru Inaba. And if I'm not mistaken, when he gets to these places called Ribat, he says it used to be a place from which the war against the infidels was conducted. Later on, it became a lodge for travelers, for merchants, and later, yes.
Because that's how,
Yes.
also even from the position you showed in the map, it looks very, I was looking for the valleys,
Yes.
the good places for battle.
Yes.
And perhaps not, perhaps the need for the alliances, more to the east and to the north, so they could battle perhaps more in between, and it's not
Yes.
so far from this area of Ribati Karvan.
Yes.
So,
Yes, exactly. So yes, Ribatat, or yes, there are many Ribatats in there.
So, çok teşekkür.
Thank you.